The sun was just rising over the quiet village, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. Birds chirped softly and the gentle wind moved the leaves on the tall trees. The village seemed peaceful, almost like nothing bad could ever happen here. But the mother Ayla knew better. She had learned long ago that the world could change in an instant. She held her daughter Lyra's small hand tightly as they walked near the edge of the forest. Lyra ran ahead, her laughter echoing like tiny bells. She stopped often to pick flowers or watch a butterfly land on a leaf. Her hair shone in the sunlight and her innocent smile made Ayla's heart swell. But Ayla's eyes never left her daughter for more than a second. Every sound in the forest made her heart beat a little faster. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, or the distant call of a bird. She could not shake the feeling that someone or something was watching them. The village had always been quiet, but there were stories. Stories of travelers who never returned, of shadows that moved faster than the wind, and of strangers who appeared suddenly and vanished without a trace. Ayla tried not to think about those stories, but the feeling in her gut kept returning. Something felt different today. The forest felt darker, heavier, as if it were holding its breath. Lyra danced around a large oak tree, completely unaware of the tension in her mother's chest. "Look, Mama, a butterfly," she shouted, pointing excitedly at a bright yellow butterfly that fluttered near a patch of wildflowers. Ayla smiled, but it was tight. "Yes, sweetie," she said. "It's beautiful. But stay close to me, okay?" Lyra giggled and skipped toward the river that ran beside the forest. The water was calm, reflecting the morning sky like a mirror. The mother followed, careful not to step on the slippery stones near the edge. She could hear her own heartbeat steady but loud in her ears. Everything seemed normal, but her instincts screamed that it wasn't. As they walked, Ayla noticed something strange. A shadow moved between the trees. It was quick, almost too fast to see, and then it disappeared. She stopped in her tracks, pulling Lyra back close to her side. "Did you see that, Mama?" Lyra asked, her small voice filled with curiosity. Ayla shook her head. "It's nothing, darling. Probably just a bird," she said, though her eyes scanned the forest carefully. Her heart raced. She could feel it in her chest, a warning that danger was near. Every mother in the village knew this feeling, but few admitted it. It was the kind of feeling that stayed with you, even when everything looked calm and safe. Ayla took a deep breath, trying to calm herself, but the unease didn't leave. They continued walking, but Ayla kept her hand on the small knife she always carried. It was hidden under her shawl, but it was ready if she ever needed it. The forest grew thicker and the sounds changed. The birds were quieter now. The wind had slowed, and the usual rustling of leaves seemed sharper, almost like whispers. She could see her breath as she spoke, though it was a warm morning. The air felt heavy, like a storm was coming. "Lyra, stay close," Ayla said, her voice firmer now. The little girl nodded but didn't seem worried. She trusted her mother completely, not knowing that the forest could be dangerous. Ayla's mind wandered to the stories of travelers and strangers, the arrows, the sudden attacks. She pushed the thoughts away, trying to focus on the present, but the shadows between the trees kept moving, always at the corner of her vision. The river sparkled in the morning light, and for a moment, Ayla allowed herself to believe that everything was fine. She knelt to help Lyra cross a small stream, making sure the stones were steady under her daughter's feet. Lyra laughed, splashing water with her tiny hands, and Ayla felt her heart warm at the sight. She wanted this moment to last forever. The laughter, the sun, the simple happiness of being together. But deep down, Ayla knew that this peace was fragile. She could feel the tension in the air, the way the forest seemed to watch them. Something was coming, she was certain of it. The sound of twigs snapping, the distant rustle of leaves, and the quick movement of shadows reminded her that danger was never far. She held Lyra a little closer, her hand gripping the small knife under her shawl. And then, just as the sun reached the middle of the sky, a faint but sharp sound cut through the morning calm, a sound that made her blood run cold. It was the whistle of an arrow slicing through the air. Ayla's heart jumped into her throat. She turned to see nothing at first, only the calm forest and the river sparkling in the sunlight. But instinct told her the danger was real, very close and very deadly. She pulled Lyra behind her, her body tense and ready. Every mother in history had faced this moment, when instinct had to take over, when fear had to be sharper than the world's quiet beauty. The peaceful morning was over. The storm was coming. The moment the arrow whistled past, Isla's heart skipped a beat. The sound was sharp and sudden, slicing through the calm morning like a knife. She barely had time to react. She pushed Lyra to the ground, covering her small body with her own. The wind carried another whistle, and another arrow struck the earth just inches from them. Dirt and leaves flew into the air. Isla's mind raced. She didn't know who was attacking or why, but she knew one thing clearly. She had to protect her daughter. Her arms tightened around Lyra as she peeked over her shoulder, scanning the forest for the source of the danger. Shadows moved fast between the trees, too quick for her eyes to follow. Something in the air told her these were no ordinary hunters. Another arrow came, grazing Isla's shoulder. Pain shot through her, sharp and hot. She gritted her teeth, holding back a scream. Lyra's eyes were wide with fear, her small hands clutching her mother's arm. "Mama, it hurts," the little girl whispered, her voice trembling. Isla shook her head. "Shh, stay down." "Don't move," she whispered back, trying to hide the panic in her voice. The attackers were close now. Isla could hear their footsteps, soft but purposeful, crunching the leaves and twigs. She had never felt fear like this before, not for herself but for her daughter. Every mother in the village knew that feeling, the overwhelming need to survive for the child no matter what. She pressed herself harder against the ground, shielding Lyra as much as she could. Suddenly, one of the shadows stepped into the sunlight. Isla's eyes widened. A man, or perhaps more than one, stood at the edge of the clearing. He was dressed in dark clothes that blended with the forest, and his hands were steady on the bow he held. His eyes locked onto Ayla and Lyra. They were calculating, cold and merciless. Ayla's stomach twisted. She had to act fast. Another arrow flew toward them and instinct took over. Without thinking, she leapt in front of her daughter. The arrow hit her shoulder again, this time deeper. Pain exploded through her arm, but she held her ground. Her body shook, but she refused to let fear control her. "Run, Lyra," she shouted, her voice cracking but strong. Lyra hesitated, frozen by fear. Isla grabbed her hand tightly. "Now run!" With tears streaming down her face, Lyra scrambled to her feet and ran toward the river, the stones slippery under her small shoes. Isla followed, hobbling but determined. Every step hurt, but she forced herself to keep moving. The attackers were relentless. Arrows flew from every direction, and the forest seemed alive with danger. Isla ducked behind a large tree, pressing Lyra against the rough bark. She could feel her daughter trembling, and the fear in her eyes broke her heart. "It's okay, Lyra, I'm here. I won't let anything happen to you," she whispered, though her own voice trembled with pain. A sudden rustle behind them made Isla spin around. One of the attackers had circled the tree, arrow ready. She lunged forward just as he released it. The arrow missed, striking the tree with a loud thud. Isla grabbed a fallen branch from the ground, her hands shaking. She couldn't fight him off completely, but she could slow him down. Every second counted. Another arrow whizzed past, and Isla felt the wind from it on her cheek. She screamed, a raw, desperate sound that echoed through the forest. Lyra clung to her tightly, burying her face in her mother's chest. The little girl's innocence was gone in that moment, replaced with pure terror. The attackers were closing in, but then something unexpected happened. From the edge of the clearing came another figure, a human, a stranger. He moved quickly, silently, but with strength in every step. He carried a sword, and his eyes were fixed on the attackers. Isla didn't know him, but at that moment he was hope. The stranger lunged at the nearest attacker, knocking the bow aside. Isla grabbed Lyra, pulling her close as chaos erupted around them. Arrows struck trees, the ground, and sometimes missed entirely, but the attackers began to retreat. The forest seemed to shake with the sound of running footsteps, the cries of the wounded, and the clash of weapons. Ayla pressed herself against Lyra, her arms aching, her body trembling from the pain and adrenaline. "You're safe now," she whispered, though she wasn't sure it was true. The attackers were still out there, somewhere in the forest. But for the first time since the first arrow flew, she felt a glimmer of hope. Someone had come to help, and that might be enough. The stranger fought with precision and determination, creating a path through the attackers. Isla saw him glance toward her and her daughter, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded, barely able to move, and he quickly guided them away from the danger. Step by step, they made their way to a small clearing near the river, where the sun reflected on the water. It was quiet for a moment, almost too quiet, and Isla didn't dare breathe. Lyra clung to her mother, her small body shaking uncontrollably. Isla held her close, feeling the warmth of her daughter's fear, the weight of the arrow's danger, and the strange, powerful presence of the stranger who had saved them. She didn't know who he was or why he had come, but she knew she owed her life, and her daughter's life, to him. For a brief moment, the forest was still. The attackers had disappeared, but the memory of their arrows, the fear, and the pain lingered. Ela pressed Lyra to her chest again, whispering soft words of comfort that neither of them could fully believe. The danger wasn't gone. She could feel it in the air, in the shadows, and in the stranger's wary eyes. And yet, for the first time since the attack began, Ela allowed herself to hope. They had survived, but only just. The storm had passed for now, but the forest still held secrets, and the next moment could bring it all back. The arrows, the fear, and the desperate fight to survive. The forest seemed quiet, but Ela knew better. Danger was still there, hidden behind the trees, in the shadows, and in every rustle of leaves. Her shoulder throbbed with pain, the arrow wound burning with every movement. She had never felt such exhaustion, but the thought of her daughter's life kept her moving. Lyra stayed close, her tiny hand gripping hers tightly, her eyes wide and scared. The stranger who had saved them paused in the clearing, his sharp gaze scanning the forest around them. He didn't speak, but his presence was a shield, a silent promise of safety, or at least a chance of it. Ela could only nod, her throat too tight for words. She pressed herself against a tree for a moment, trying to stop the blood from dripping onto Lyra's clothes. Her body shook, not just from the pain, but from the adrenaline and fear. "Stay behind me," the stranger finally said, his voice low and steady. He carried a sword and moved like a shadow, silent but purposeful. Ela had no choice but to trust him. Every instinct screamed that if they moved without care, the attackers could return at any moment. The forest was their only ally now, and even it felt dangerous. Step by step they moved through the trees. Ela's legs ached with every step, and Lyra's small feet stumbled on roots and stones. The wound on her shoulder burned, a constant reminder that they could not stop. Every sound, the snap of a twig, a bird taking flight, the whisper of the wind, made her heart jump. She kept whispering to Lyra, though her words barely reached the trembling little girl. "Stay close, sweetie. Don't let go of my hand," she said. Lyra nodded silently, burying her face in her mother's chest whenever the stranger turned back to check on them. The forest was dense here, the trees close together, their branches intertwining above like a natural roof. Shadows played tricks on Ela's eyes, making it hard to tell friend from foe. Suddenly, a sound broke the tense silence, a low growl, deep and threatening. Ela froze. Lyra whimpered. The stranger's eyes narrowed, and he raised his sword. Ela couldn't see it, but she felt the danger in her bones. Something was moving in the bushes, something large and hungry. She hugged Lyra tightly, covering her from view. A dark shape leapt from the underbrush. Ela screamed, a mix of fear and pain, as the stranger swung his sword. The creature, or perhaps a wild animal disturbed by the chaos, stopped mid-leap, startled, before retreating with a snarl. Ela's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Lyra clung to her, shivering, and Ela realized how close they had come to losing even more than they already had. They continued, slower now, moving carefully to avoid the rough terrain. Every shadow, every rustle made Ela flinch. Her shoulder burned with every step, and blood dripped onto the forest floor. She tried to ignore it, telling herself that stopping would mean certain death. Lyra, small and frightened, stayed close, her hand never leaving hers. The stranger led them to a small stream hidden among the trees. The water was clear, and for a moment it seemed like a safe place. He knelt down, looking at Ila's shoulder. "You need help," he said finally, his voice calm but urgent. Ela shook her head. She couldn't stop here, not yet. Not while the attackers might still be nearby. I can't," she whispered. "If we stop, they'll find us." Pain laced her voice, but she forced herself to keep moving. The stranger didn't argue. He understood. He helped her move along, supporting her weight so she wouldn't fall. Lyra followed silently, too scared to speak. Her small hand clung to her mother's skirt as they walked through the dense forest. The sun climbed higher, but the canopy above blocked most of the light. The forest was dark and quiet, except for the occasional cry of a bird or the rustle of leaves. Ela could hear her own ragged breathing and Lyra's tiny, frightened gasps. She pressed a hand to her daughter's back, whispering words of comfort she barely believed herself. Hours seemed to pass. Every step was an effort. Every movement sent waves of pain through Isla's body. Her shoulder throbbed and she felt weak, almost too weak to continue. But the stranger never wavered. He guided them, moving ahead to scout, then returning to make sure they were still following. His presence was a lifeline in the endless green maze. At last they reached a small clearing. The sun shone more brightly here, and the sound of water trickling from a distant stream filled the air. For the first time since the attack, Ayla allowed herself to sit down, holding Lyra close. She could feel the little girl trembling against her chest. Ayla's own body shook, pain and exhaustion overwhelming her. "You're safe for now," the stranger said, standing nearby, sword ready. "But we can't stay here long." Ayla nodded. She knew he was right. The attackers could return and the forest was full of dangers. But for a moment, she let herself breathe. Feeling the warmth of the sun and the steady presence of the stranger, Lyra looked up at her mother with wide, scared eyes. Ayla kissed her forehead and whispered, "We're going to be okay. I promise." The forest was still tense, the shadows deep, and the unknown still waiting. But Ayla had survived the first wave. She had protected her daughter. And for now, that was enough. The fight wasn't over, but they had a chance, a small, fragile chance to live, to escape, to survive. And Ayla would cling to that chance with every ounce of strength she had left. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Ayla pressed her daughter close. Every sound, the snap of a twig, a distant bird, the rustle of leaves, made her heart jump. She could feel Lyra trembling against her, tiny body shaking with fear. The stranger stood a few steps ahead, scanning the shadows, alert and ready. For the first time, Ayla felt a strange mix of hope and uncertainty. The danger hadn't gone, but someone had come to help them. A sudden movement caught Ayla's eye. A figure emerged from the shadows, another attacker, this one closer than she had expected. An arrow was already nocked, aimed directly at them. Time slowed. Ayla's instincts kicked in. She pushed Lyra behind her and raised her own body, shielding the little girl. Pain lanced through her shoulder where the first arrows had grazed her. But she ignored it. Survival and protection were all that mattered. The stranger reacted faster than Ayla could follow. With a single swift motion, he leapt forward, knocking the bow from the attacker's hands. The arrow fell harmlessly to the ground. Ayla's heart pounded in her chest as she watched him stand tall, his presence commanding. He didn't speak, but his eyes told her one thing clearly. Move. Now. Ayla grabbed Lyra's hand and began running, her legs trembling with exhaustion. Every step was agony, but she forced herself forward. The stranger stayed close, intercepting any threat that appeared, cutting a path through the danger like a shield around them. The forest blurred past, trees, roots, and rocks, but Ayla didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. Another arrow whistled through the air, dangerously close. Ayla ducked instinctively, and it buried itself in the trunk of a tree behind her. The attackers were relentless, and fear coiled tightly in her chest. She could feel Lyra's small hand gripping hers, nails digging into her palm. Ayla whispered words of encouragement, though her own voice shook. "Almost there, Lyra, just a little further. You're safe with me." They ran into a small clearing, sunlight breaking through the canopy in golden streaks. For a brief moment, the forest felt less threatening, almost calm. But Ayla knew better. Danger lurked in every shadow. She pressed Lyra close, scanning the area with tired, wary eyes. The stranger moved ahead, silently assessing the surroundings. And Ayla realized that they were not just running. They were being guided. Suddenly, a loud shout echoed from the trees. The attackers had regrouped. Ayla froze. She could see them now, emerging in the distance, bows raised and arrows ready. Panic surged through her, but before she could react, the stranger charged toward them. His sword flashed in the sunlight as he created a barrier between Ayla and the approaching danger. Ayla barely had time to breathe, let alone think. "Run!" he shouted. His voice was urgent, commanding. Ayla grabbed Lyra's hand and ran again, tears blurring her vision. Her shoulder burned, every step a sharp reminder of the arrows that had found her. But she refused to collapse. Lyra's frightened sobs echoed behind her, and she pressed her lips to her daughter's hair, murmuring soothing words she didn't quite feel. The stranger fought with precision, keeping the attackers at bay. He moved like a shadow, striking, deflecting, and disappearing into the trees, always returning to protect them. Each movement was calculated, fast, and terrifyingly effective. Ayla could only watch, her fear mingling with awe. She didn't know who he was, but in that moment he was their lifeline. The clearing opened into a narrow path leading down toward a river. Isla guided Lyra along it, slipping on loose stones, struggling to stay upright. The water sparkled in the sunlight, offering a glimmer of hope. They could almost taste safety. The stranger stayed a few steps behind, sword ready, turning at every sound to ensure they weren't followed. Suddenly, an arrow hit the ground near them, throwing dirt and leaves into the air. Isla's heart leapt. She froze, but the stranger moved instantly, charging forward and knocking the last attacker off balance. The figure stumbled and disappeared into the forest, leaving only silence in its wake. For the first time in hours, Ayla allowed herself to breathe. The immediate danger was gone. She sank to the ground, holding Lyra tightly. Her body shook from pain, exhaustion, and relief all at once. Lyra clung to her mother, burying her face in Ayla's chest, still trembling. The stranger knelt beside them, his sword resting on the ground. He didn't speak, but his calm presence was comforting. Ayla realized that he had saved them, not just from the arrows, but from the forest itself, the darkness, and the fear that had threatened to consume them. The river flowed nearby, its gentle sound washing over them. Ayla pressed a hand to her daughter's hair and whispered, "You're safe now. You're alive." Tears streamed down her face, and she felt a mix of exhaustion and gratitude she couldn't put into words. Lyra looked up at the stranger with wide eyes, sensing without understanding the bravery that had saved them. For a moment, they just sat there, catching their breath. The forest around them was quiet, but Ayla knew better. There were still dangers, still threats waiting in the shadows. But now they had an ally, a protector. The stranger's presence gave them a chance to survive, to move forward, to escape. Ayla's shoulder throbbed violently, and she realized she could not keep running forever. But with the stranger beside them, she had hope. For the first time since the attack began, she believed they might survive. She held Lyra tightly, feeling her daughter's small hands clutching hers, and she whispered a silent promise. No matter what came next, she would protect her. The forest still held its secrets, and the threat was far from over. But in that moment, with her daughter safe in her arms and the stranger standing guard, Ayla felt something she hadn't in hours: strength. They had survived the first wave. The fight was not over, but hope had returned, and sometimes hope was all a mother needed to keep moving forward. The forest seemed endless, a maze of trees, roots, and shadows. Ayla's shoulder throbbed, each movement a sharp reminder of the arrows that had grazed her. Her legs ached from running, yet she refused to stop. Lyra clung tightly to her hand, her small body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The stranger stayed a few steps ahead, scanning the path, his sword ready. Every sound, the snap of a branch, the whisper of the wind, made Ayla's heart leap. "Stay close," Ayla whispered to Lyra. The little girl nodded silently, her eyes wide, her small fingers digging into her mother's palm. Each step forward felt heavy, like they were carrying not just their bodies, but the weight of the attack and the terror that still lingered in the forest. The path narrowed as they moved deeper, the trees growing closer together. Sunlight barely reached the ground, and shadows stretched long and dark, making it difficult to see where they were going. Ayla could hear her own ragged breathing and Lyra's soft whimpers, mingling with the distant sounds of the forest. Danger could be anywhere, waiting silently. Suddenly, a rustle in the bushes made her freeze. Lyra pressed against her, and Ayla's heart pounded. The stranger moved instantly, stepping between them and the shadow. He raised his sword, alert and ready. A moment later, a small fox darted out, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Ayla exhaled slowly, feeling her body relax a fraction. Even the smallest movement could make her panic. They continued along the narrow path, moving cautiously. The stranger occasionally glanced back, silently checking on them. Ayla could see the determination in his eyes. He was not just guiding them, he was protecting them. And in that protection, Ayla felt a fragile thread of hope. Hours seemed to stretch endlessly. Every step was a test of endurance. Ayla's shoulder burned and her muscles screamed in protest. Yet she moved forward, refusing to collapse. Lyra's small legs stumbled over roots and rocks, but Ayla caught her each time, whispering words of encouragement. The little girl's fear was palpable, yet her trust in her mother was unshakable. They reached a small river that cut through the forest. The water was cold and clear, a glimmer of relief in the harsh, dark woods. Ayla knelt for a moment, letting Lyra drink from her hands. The stranger scanned the forest around them, his eyes sharp, never letting down his guard. Ayla felt a moment of gratitude for him, for the strength and courage that had kept them alive so far. But their relief was short-lived. From the trees behind them came the faint sound of movement. Isla's stomach twisted. The attackers had not given up, they were following. Arrows could still fly from the shadows, and danger was far from over. She grabbed Lyra's hand tightly. "We have to keep moving," she whispered, her voice trembling. The stranger led them along the riverbank, finding a safer route. The ground was slippery and uneven, and Isla's wounded shoulder made each step painful, but she gritted her teeth and pushed forward. Lyra stumbled, and Ayla caught her just in time. "Don't worry, sweetie. I won't let anything happen to you," she said, more to convince herself than the child. Suddenly, the forest opened into a small meadow, bathed in sunlight. It seemed almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. But Ayla knew better. The attackers could appear at any moment. She kept Lyra close, scanning the edges of the meadow, feeling the tension in the air. The stranger moved ahead, signaling for them to follow. He guided them to a hidden path that led to a ridge overlooking the village. From there they could see the rooftops, the familiar shapes of their home. Ayla felt a wave of relief mixed with fear. They were close to safety, but the forest still held dangers. One wrong step, one unnoticed movement, and everything could be lost. As they moved along the ridge, a shadow appeared on the path below. Ayla froze. The stranger stepped forward, sword raised. Ayla pressed Lyra against her chest. The figure was too far to see clearly, but instinct screamed danger. They waited, tense and silent. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the shadow disappeared into the trees. Ayla exhaled, trying to calm her racing heart. The final stretch to the village was the most difficult. Ayla's strength was waning, her shoulder burning with pain. Lyra's steps slowed, and Ayla had to lift her over rocks and branches. Every movement sent waves of agony through her body. Yet step by step they pressed forward, driven by desperation and the will to survive. Finally, the village came into view, a place that should have been safe but still felt fragile. The stranger guided them to a small safe spot behind a cluster of houses. Ayla sank to the ground, holding Lyra tightly. Tears streamed down her face, a mix of pain, fear, and relief. Lyra buried her face in her mother's chest, still trembling but alive. The stranger knelt beside them, sword resting on the ground. He didn't speak, but his presence was reassuring. Ayla looked at him, gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The stranger simply nodded, his gaze still scanning the forest. Safety was temporary, and the danger was never far. But for now they had survived. Ayla pressed Lyra's small hand to her cheek. "We're almost safe," she murmured. "We're going to get through this." Lyra looked up at her mother, eyes wide but trusting. And in that moment, Ayla realized that no matter the pain, no matter the fear, they had made it this far. Survival was still possible. Hope was still alive. The forest behind them was silent for a moment, but Ayla knew the journey wasn't over. They had escaped the first wave, but the world outside the village was still dangerous. She held Lyra close, drawing strength from her daughter's trust. Step by step, they would continue. Together, they would survive. The small safe spot behind the cluster of village houses felt almost unreal after the terror of the forest. Ayla sank onto the ground, holding Lyra tightly, feeling her daughter's small, trembling body pressed against her chest. The little girl's breaths were uneven, and tears had streaked her dirt-smudged face. For the first time since the attack began, Ayla allowed herself to fully see the aftermath. The blood on her shoulder, the bruises forming across her arms, and the sheer exhaustion that weighed her down like a heavy stone. The stranger, who had guided and protected them through the forest, crouched nearby. He had lowered his sword but did not relax. His eyes still scanned the trees, alert to any sign of danger. Ayla looked at him, trying to find the right words, but none came. She only nodded, a silent gesture of gratitude. In that moment, words felt unnecessary. His presence alone was enough. "Rest for a moment," he finally said, his voice calm but firm. Ayla hesitated, feeling the ache in her shoulder and the throbbing in her legs, but she shook her head. "I can't, not yet. Not while it's possible they could come back," she whispered. The stranger gave a small, understanding nod. He was right, of course. Danger still lurked, but she had learned that resting was sometimes the only way to survive the next step. Carefully, she shifted to let Lyra sit beside her. The little girl clung to her mother, her fingers tangled in Ayla's hair. "Mama, will they come back?" Lyra's voice was small, almost broken. Ayla hugged her tightly, brushing her messy hair from her face. I don't know, sweetie, she admitted, her own voice shaking. But we're safe for now, and we'll stay together. That's what matters. The sunlight filtering through the trees cast long shadows, and the forest beyond the village seemed impossibly far. But the warmth of the small clearing, combined with the stranger's protective presence, created a fragile bubble of safety. Ayla pressed her hand to Lyra's back, feeling the rise and fall of her tiny chest, and thought about everything they had survived. The arrows, the fear, the relentless pursuit. Her mind drifted to the moments in the forest, the panic, the pain, the weight of responsibility pressing on her like a mountain. She remembered the instant she had thrown herself in front of her daughter, the burning pain in her shoulder, and the overwhelming fear of losing Lyra. Tears welled in her eyes as she relived those seconds. The forest had demanded everything from her, and she had given it. Yet somehow they had survived. The stranger moved closer and knelt beside her, examining her shoulder. You need proper care, he said softly, pointing to the wound. Ayla shook her head. Not yet, we need to get somewhere safer first. She winced as she adjusted her arm. The pain was sharp, but she forced herself to ignore it. Survival required focus, not distraction by injury. Lyra, sensing the tension in her mother, spoke softly. Mama, will it hurt again? Her small voice was full of fear and confusion. Ayla smiled weakly, brushing a tear from her daughter's cheek. No, sweetie. I won't let anything hurt you again. We're together, and that's all that matters. I promise. Lyra leaned against her, finding comfort in her mother's embrace despite the lingering fear. Hours passed slowly. Ayla closed her eyes briefly, feeling the exhaustion pressing down, and allowed herself to remember why she had fought so fiercely. Every mother carried a fierce love for her child, a force stronger than fear or pain. She had faced the worst of it and had survived. Lyra was alive, and for that, every step, every scream, every tear was worth it. The stranger finally spoke again. We should move soon before night falls. Ayla nodded. She could feel the truth in his words. Danger never truly rested, and staying in one place too long was a risk they could not take. Yet she took one last moment to hold Lyra close, drawing strength from her daughter's small, trusting presence. In that quiet moment, Ayla reflected on everything that had happened. Fear had pushed her to the limits of her strength. Pain had tested her body, and yet the bond between her and Lyra had grown even stronger. Every heartbeat, every desperate move to protect her daughter had forged a connection deeper than words could describe. She realized that survival wasn't just about escaping danger, it was about holding on to the ones you loved. Even when the world seemed intent on tearing them away, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the clearing. Ayla adjusted her grip on Lyra's hand and rose slowly, wincing at the pain in her shoulder. She felt the stranger behind her, steady and silent, ready to act if needed. With one last deep breath, she whispered to Lyra, We move together. And we stay strong. Always. Lyra nodded, her small face set with a mixture of fear and determination. Ayla knew the path ahead would not be easy. There would be more obstacles, more challenges. But she also knew one undeniable truth. They had survived this far because of courage, love, and the unyielding will to protect each other. And that strength would carry them forward step by painful step toward the safety they had not yet fully reached. The forest was still, holding its secrets in the fading light. But in the small clearing, with Lyra safe in her arms and the stranger beside them, Ayla allowed herself to hope. Recovery would be slow and reflection painful, but they were alive. And that, she thought, was everything. The village lay ahead, small and quiet, with smoke curling from chimneys and the distant sound of children playing. To any ordinary passerby, it seemed peaceful, safe, and familiar. But for Ayla and Lyra, the world beyond the forest was still fragile, tinged with the memory of arrows, shadows, and the terror they had escaped. They had survived, but the danger had left its mark, etched deep into their minds and hearts. Ayla guided Lyra along the narrow dirt path toward their home. Every step was careful, her injured shoulder still aching from the attack. Lyra's small hand squeezed hers tightly, silent but steadfast. Ayla's eyes scanned every movement in the trees and along the rooftops. She had learned that safety was never guaranteed, and even in familiar surroundings, caution was necessary. The stranger followed quietly, a shadow beside them, sword lowered, but ready. Isla had never learned his name, and yet his presence had been their lifeline. Without him, she knew they would not have survived the forest. She glanced at him briefly, a mix of gratitude and respect in her eyes. He nodded slightly, understanding that no words could fully express the debt she felt. As they approached the village, a few villagers noticed them and came forward. At first, their faces were puzzled. Isla's clothes were torn, her hair disheveled, her body marked by pain. Lyra's small frame clung to her mother, wide-eyed and trembling. Whispers spread quickly. Some ran to help, while others called for aid, realizing something terrible had happened. Ayla led Lyra to the small home where they had lived before the forest attack. The door was unlocked, and the familiar space, simple and warm, greeted them. The comfort of home, the smell of wood and earth, felt almost unreal after the chaos they had endured. Ayla set Lyra down gently, letting her explore the familiar corners while she sank onto a chair, exhausted yet vigilant. The stranger remained at the door, scanning the village with the same sharp focus that had saved them countless times. "You can rest here," Ayla whispered, surprising herself with the trust in her voice. The stranger nodded, stepping back slightly, still cautious, still ready. Lyra ran to her small bed and curled up with a blanket, but she didn't close her eyes. Fear lingered, clinging to her like a shadow. Ayla watched her daughter and felt a surge of protectiveness. She knelt beside the bed and stroked Lyra's hair. "You're safe now," she whispered softly. "Nothing can touch us here. Not while I'm with you." Lyra's small hand reached up, clutching her mother's fingers tightly. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the village. Ayla took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her body slowly unwind. She realized that the forest, the arrows, and the terror were behind them for now. But the memory of every moment would remain, a quiet reminder of how quickly life could change, and how fragile safety truly was. The stranger finally spoke, breaking the silence. "You'll need help with your shoulder," he said quietly. Ayla looked down at the wound, her mind still clouded with exhaustion and relief. She nodded. "Yes? But first I need to make sure Lyra is truly safe," she replied. The stranger simply nodded again, understanding her priorities. Hours passed. The village healer tended to Ayla's shoulder, cleaning the wound and binding it carefully. Lyra stayed close, sitting on her mother's lap and holding her hand. The little girl's fear gradually softened into quiet relief. She still shivered occasionally, but Ayla whispered words of comfort, reinforcing the safety they now had. As night fell, the small home glowed with candlelight. Ayla and Lyra sat together, sharing warmth, holding on to each other. The stranger remained nearby, a silent guardian before quietly slipping away into the shadows outside. His parting was wordless, but his presence had left a lasting impression. He had saved them, and his courage would remain in their hearts forever. Ayla held Lyra close, thinking about everything that had happened. She realized that the attack, the arrows, the terror had changed them, but it had also strengthened the bond between mother and daughter. Fear had been replaced by love. Desperation had turned into courage, and survival had forged a deep resilience. She whispered almost to herself. "We made it, Lyra. We survived." Together, the little girl looked up, eyes wide but trusting. "Mama, will we always be safe?" she asked softly. Ayla smiled, brushing the hair from her daughter's face. "We'll do everything we can," she said. "As long as we're together, we can face anything." Outside, the night was still. The forest lay dark beyond the village, holding its secrets. But inside their small home, light, warmth, and love filled the space. Ayla knew that life would never be the same, that the memory of danger would linger. But she also knew something stronger: courage, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between her and Lyra. The story of the arrows, the fear and the desperate flight through the forest had ended, but its lessons remained. Every heartbeat, every step, every choice to protect and survive had shaped them. Ayla and Lyra had faced death, but they had also discovered the depth of their love, the power of courage, and the quiet strength that comes from surviving together. As they sat by the small window, looking at the stars beginning to appear, Ayla held her daughter close and whispered one last promise. "No matter what comes, we will survive together always." Lyra clung to her, Comforted by the warmth of her mother's arms, and for the first time in hours, the fear that had followed them began to fade. The night embraced them, calm and quiet. Outside, the forest still held its dangers, but inside, love and hope had taken root. Isla closed her eyes, feeling Lyra breathe softly against her chest. They were safe. They had survived, and though the scars of that day would remain, the bond forged in fire would carry them forward into whatever the future held.